Today's session, we're going to be looking at a new topic, which is ethics and copyright. Now, this section is all about essay type questions, discussion, debate, finding out what's going out in the world, and then linking it to develop your arguments. Unfortunately, you don't have someone to hold these discussions with. So it might be very useful for you to look at alternative viewpoints, TEDx talks, look at different types of published articles to see both sides of the argument to inform your own understanding of the topics. Now, ethics and morality can be very personal because what I feel is right, you might not feel that to be the case, or vice versa. So we're going to start by looking at the need for and the purpose of ethics as a computer professional. Why do we need to be ethical? And you also need to be able to show understanding of the need to act ethically and the impact of acting ethically or unethically for a particular situation. Now think about it this way. A person comes to you as a programmer to develop a piece of software in Java. Now you don't know Java, but you know someone who knows Java, and you ask them to make the program for you. You give the program back to the user and the money to the developer. But have you acted ethically or not? Now ponder on that for a bit and we'll discuss it in a moment. But before that, you might want to watch this video, which is related to a fight or a case between Google and Oracle.
The Supreme Court today resolved a decade-old dispute between two American titans of technology. Google and Oracle have been locked in a multi-billion-dollar legal fight with high stakes for investors and future innovation. And today, the justices sided with Google. For more on what this all means, we're joined now by our senior Washington reporter, Devin Dwyer, who covers the Supreme Court for us. Devin, break it all down. Explain the case and also how the court ruled.
Yeah, Lindsay, this was dubbed the copyright case of the century, and it really involved Google's copying of 11,000 lines of computer code from Oracle's program called Java, and they used it to develop the Android operating system for smartphones. So something many of us are familiar with. Oracle said Google is guilty of an egregious case of plagiarism. They wanted $9 billion for copying that code. Google, on the other hand, said all of this was purely functional computer code. There was no copyright infringement involved. And today, the Supreme Court, in a 6-2 decision, sided with Google. Justice Breyer wrote for the majority, said Google essentially transformed that code into a new product. Take a look. Here's what he wrote. He said Google copied only what was needed to allow programmers to work in a different computer environment without discarding a portion of familiar programming language. In part, there Breyer argued that Google would risk public harm if it was punished for copying that code, since so much of software development in general relies on these building blocks, using other people's code to advance that innovation. And today, the court handed a huge win to Google, Lindsay.
And what's been the reaction to that decision, and what could it mean for consumers?
Well, this is one of the most closely watched cases of the year, believe it or not, both because these are two huge American companies and a lot of people's 401ks, but also because what it means for software development in this country. Oracle blasted the decision, said it's going to hurt competition. It has emboldened a giant, a monopolist. Google, in their terms, here was their statement. They said Google stole Java, that's the code, and spent a decade litigating as only a monopolist can. Of course, several startup companies on the side of Oracle here said, Lindsay, this could really harm startups if all the work they do can simply be copied by big giants like Google. But Google out with a statement this evening saying this is actually a win for consumers and interoperability in computer science. The company says it will benefit developers who like to build on these building blocks of technology. Of course, Google also avoids a huge penalty for copyright infringement, Lindsay.
And a lot of far-reaching implications. Devin Dwyer,
That's right.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Lindsay.
So quite clearly, that situation in itself can lead to different perspectives of what is right and what is wrong. Was Google correct in a way that you can take someone's software or parts of their software, include it in their code, build upon it, and not credit the original author? Was Oracle writes in their stance that this is our software, you should not use it without our permission. Now, all of these have an impact on how people perceive the use of technology. And technology isn't just about us as an individual, it's also about the impact it has on society. So think about automation and the results that that might have on job losses or possible job gains through upskilling of staff. Look at both sides of the argument. It's very easy to dismiss technology is evil or technology is good, fall into one of those camps. But you, as a computer scientist, need to look at everything objectively. And the reason you need to do that is because that helps eliminate bias. And bias in itself is a big problem, as you will see when we talk about artificial intelligence a bit later on. Now, if you were thinking about the situation that we talked about regarding the programmer, did he act ethically or not? Well, from my perspective and from the code of conduct that we will again look at in due course, the programmer didn't act ethically. Even though he didn't gain any money, the fact that when the customer approached him to make a Java program, the programmer should have simply said, sorry, I don't know how to do it, but there is another person that I can introduce you to who can help you with the project. Even though no money is exchanged hand, there's a reputation risk, there's a matter of trust. There could be unforeseen issues in the future where, for example, the original programmer, the one who coded the thing in Java, might leave and the program has bugs. And when the user comes back, the programmer might not be able to fix them because obviously they didn't code the program. There's also kind of like reputation gain that they've coded it in Java, so even though they weren't getting money, their reputation as a programmer might increase, and that is unethical. Due credit doesn't just mean financial credit, it could also be in reputation. So a number of factors can come into play to argue the case that this is actually unethical behavior. But before we get into the nitty-gritty of ethics and how code of conducts and AI and all of the others come into play, let's start by reviewing a few key terms. These key terms will come into use throughout the unit, so make sure you know what it means when we talk about legal, morality, ethics, privacy, intellectual property rights, plagiarism, and culture. So pause the video as always and jot these terms down. These will make it easier for you to understand what the terms mean as we discuss them. So legal is relating to or permissible by law. What a government says is acceptable or not. Often breaking it can lead to serious consequences or fine. Morality is an understanding of the difference between right and wrong, often found in personal beliefs. And ethics are moral principles which govern an individual or organization's behavior, normally such as a code of conduct like the one you have in school. Now, privacy is the right to keep your personal information and data secret and not for it to be accessed without your permission. And intellectual property rights are similar to copyright. So they are rules that govern the creation or use of a particular individual's work. Now, plagiarism is the act of taking someone else's work and passing it on as yours. And culture is normally the attitudes, values, and practices shared by a group or a community. Now, let's start by looking at legality. Anything that breaks the law is illegal. An example of that is copying software and selling it without permission. You can often get fined or even get a prison sentence. There is no ambiguity, there is no uncertainty. You know you have to follow the law. Now, morality is our desire to choose between right and wrong. And it does vary between person to person, and it also varies between cultures. Immoral often doesn't mean illegal, it's just that it's not accepted. Now, creating a fake website might not be illegal, but definitely could be immoral. Hacking in itself might be immoral, but might not be illegal unless it impacts security, theft, or a loss. In some countries, hacking is allowed, if you want to get into your device because you forgot your password. So you go to somebody like Apple, Genius Bar, or you might go to other places where people actually hack into your software or your hardware and allow you to gain access to it. In other countries, it's an illegal approach. So do remember, it varies from country to country. Now, there is a fine line between morality and legality. Morality is often governed by principles or, in cases, a company's code of conduct, and this part is known as ethics. Because there are often a lot of individuals who might have different moral standards, a company might decide to create this code of conduct to enforce ethical behavior. Unethical behavior occurs when you break the rules of a code of conduct, for example, passing company secrets to an outsider, and if it leads to financial gain, it actually might even be illegal. So not only are you breaking the ethical code of conduct, which by means is not legally enforceable, but that could have social consequences, like you getting sacked or you not being accepted in a certain segment of society. But in some certain cases, it also might break the law. So there is always a fine line between morality and legality. An easy way to remember this is to create a grid where you can have ethical and not ethical behavior on one side and legal and not legal behavior on the other side. So in this particular grid, ethical behavior could be that it's both legal and ethical to protect privacy when a customer makes an online purchase from a website. It is not legal though, but it could be considered ethical to leak information that appeared on your employer's intranet to the media to stop an illegal activity that is occurring in your company, like fraud. And similarly, it might be legal but not really considered ethical to call in sick to work when you're not really sick, or to accept gifts from people in return for awarding a contract. Now, it's neither legal nor ethical to sell email addresses of your customers without their permission because you're both breaking the law, data protection, and obviously that's not a nice or a right thing to do. Now, once you create this type of a grid, it can make life a lot easier for you to put things into categories, and that's going to be your next task. So create a similar grid and discuss ethical versus legal scenarios based on what you know. This type of activity should take you about 10 minutes. So we just create a grid on a piece of paper, give the headings legal, not legal, ethical, not ethical, and then think of situations that could fall into those. So a situation which is both legal and ethical, not legal and ethical, legal and not ethical, and not ethical and not legal. So you can work that out. And do share that with me. Now, if you do get stuck, then feel free to use the internet for research and then share your answers with me. Now, computer ethics are basically a set of principles to regulate the use of computers. They normally cover three main areas for us in the syllabus. The first one is intellectual property rights, basically copyright, and then privacy issues, and then finally the effect of computers on society. For example, things like job losses, social impacts, environmental impacts, and so on. So when looking at answering questions related to ethical behavior, they might fall into one of these three categories. Now, in order to develop standards and ethics, there is a significant role played by professional bodies. And these professional bodies establish a code of conduct. They represent the rights of their members and the profession. They uphold standards and they raise awareness about ethical issues and promote ethical behavior. Now, there are three main ones that you need to be aware of. The first one is the British Computer Society, BCS. Then you've got the Institute of Electrical and Electronic Engineers, IEEE. And the final one is ACM, Association of Computer Machinery. And they also do a lot of work on developing codes of conduct and ethics. So let's start by looking at these code of conduct. So your next task is to investigate the code of conduct for the British Computer Society, Association of Computer Machinery, and the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers, IEEE. So just do a quick Google search and just get their code of conducts bookmarked. You don't need to kind of study these in detail, but you need to be aware of the areas that they focus on. So, what are the categories they're looking for? Things like professional integrity, the role of the profession, individual's role. So, find out what is common between all of these. Now, it might take you a lot longer than 10 minutes. 10 minutes are just to kind of find them and download them, but you might need to spend maybe about 20-25 minutes just going through these code of conducts and working out similarities that are possible, because some code of conducts might be relevant to an individual's use of computers, the other might be focusing on the organization's role of using computers. So they might have different audiences. So do get yourself familiar with these. In the exam, what's going to probably happen is that you'll probably be given some extracts of these code of conducts. You're not supposed to memorize them or remember them, and you will need to apply them into a particular situation. Find out where someone is either breaking the code of conduct or adhering to a code of conduct. So do pause the video and get on with this particular task. Now, plagiarism is another area that we often don't think is unethical. A lot of people easily share data, easily take images of the internet and pass it in their work. I mean, you might have done it in the past where you've just gone on Google, haven't bothered about the copyright, and just taken an image and put it in your presentation, and off you go. Now, normally, if you see a cartoon, there's normally a copyright sign somewhere that identifies who the copyright belongs to. And often you probably should realize that for education purposes, you're allowed to, there's something called fair use, and you're allowed to use graphics and extracts, I think up to 10-15 seconds of video as well, for the purposes of education or parody and things like that in certain countries. But plagiarism on its own is not recognizing that copyright and then passing the work as your own. Although it's not a criminal offense, such actions are certainly not ethical. So if I go to you that I made the cartoon that you see on screen, then that would be unethical behavior. But it's not really illegal because I'm not gaining any money from it. Now, if I decide to sell this cartoon as my own, then I would be breaking copyright, and that would be illegal. To avoid any accusation of plagiarism, it is important to acknowledge the originator in any work, example as footnotes or as references. So if you look closely on the second part of the cartoon, you'll probably see an acknowledgement in the form of a copyright statement that has been put in. Now, in certain situations, people or organizations guilty of plagiarism may face prosecution under copyright laws if they were making money from it or they benefited in any kind. So just be aware, plagiarism itself is not illegal, it's unethical. But if you gain anything like reputation, qualification, or money from the result of that plagiarism, then you're breaking copyright. Now, copyright itself is a legal right given to the author of the work, and this involves computer programs, music, art, books, a paragraph, a photograph, whatever. And you decide, the owner decides what terms their work can be used by others. For example, you might decide license agreements, fees, or you might give it away for free, but it is your right. Copyright laws were created to protect the interests of authors of original work, and without this protection, it wouldn't be in anyone's financial interest to invest so much of their time creating new things. So it's only right or ethical that people receive fair compensation or pay for their efforts. And unlike plagiarism, breaking copyright is often a criminal offense. It is important to remember that just because something is online, it doesn't mean that it doesn't have copyright. It is not just free, and its use is not okay. You'd really need to do your due diligence, and you'd really need to find out whether the original owner has given permission for you to use the work. So be careful. Now, remember, education is a different field. So, but not every author would be giving rights for their work to be used. So it's up to you to find that out, and not the author's responsibility. By now, you should know the difference between legal, ethical, and moral behaviors. Legal is law. You break the law, there is a significant consequence. Ethical is informed by a code of conduct, and moral is personal. What is meant by computer ethics? What are the three main areas that computer ethics deal with? What is meant by copyright? What is plagiarism? And what are the main issues related to copyright? And what is the purpose of a code of conduct or ethics? Why do we have these things? Now, do get back to me if any of these questions seem challenging or you're not sure of how to answer those, and I will get back to you. But on the whole, just remember that computer ethics is increasingly becoming a significant topic of concern because there are technologies that are now impacting billions around the world, and the decision making is left to a few people who are very rich, very isolated, and not involved in the day-to-day processes on which they're being impacted upon. So think about the advent of artificial intelligence and quantum computing. These are going to be impacting billions of people around the world. And if you don't know right from wrong, if you don't care about bias, you might end up making decisions which might be prejudiced towards a certain section of the community. And we've got to take better care. So it's up to us computer scientists to think about the ethical side of our software before we start developing it, during we develop it, and perhaps after as well. That's all for today. We'll continue the conversation in our next session.